Welcome to episode 3 of The Stride, a podcast by Next Stride focusing on sponsorship in emerging and niche sports. My name is JP, and very happy to have you here today listening to this third podcast, which is going to look at the mechanisms of reward and recognition in sport, focusing again on the emerging and niche sport perspective. So, without further ado, let's take a look at how all of this works. So, first of all, we're going to be looking at 4 different roles in this interplay. We have the athlete, we have the sport, which is represented by the governing body or the sport federation, like the people who organize the rules and like general organization of the sport. Then we have the general public or the audience. And then finally, we have the sponsor. And we're going to look at how these different sort of reward mechanisms work between these different parties and how does this all fit together. And again, this is like part of the next series, initial series of 6 podcasts to cover our basic sort of philosophy of how we think that the world of sports sponsorship works today and how it should work tomorrow and why we're making a change in these mechanisms. Okay, so as always, I think that it's prudent to start with the athlete. So let's look at the athlete first. So basically, the athlete, they have they have a need for intrinsic rewards and for recognition, and the recognition can take many forms. So the intrinsic reward itself is a sort of it's a form of internal reward. So this is like a satisfaction or fulfillment and sense of having done a good job. Like this is either just from participating in a sport at the early stages of your career and typically later on from achieving significant milestones like championships or records in the sport. The intrinsic reward, it's driven by internal factors such as passion and joy of competition and personal growth and that sort of stuff. And these are really crucial for athletes' motivation, especially early on, to get into the sport and into niche sports where external recognition might be limited. But over time, they get sort of superseded by these other forms of reward. And also, I think that generally speaking, while in theory, in economics or psychology, intrinsic reward is seen as a purely internal mechanism, I think in sports you can never actually disconnect it from the external validation and recognition from the sport, from the audience, and from the sponsor. We'll get back to that. Okay, so the recognition and validation, like these are really important because as the athlete achieves success, they seek recognition from their peers, the public, and the governing bodies. And this is a validation for their hard work and to sort of just legitimize that, yes, you've done a good job. And this enhances or boosts or multiplies the intrinsic rewards. It sort of confirms that, yes, that good feeling that you got, you really deserve it. And for many athletes, the recognition is then sort of the bridge between intrinsic motivation and external rewards. And the external rewards, well, at the end of the day, for most athletes, this is financial rewards. Because while intrinsic rewards are vital, then financial support is what pays the bills, what sustains the athlete and their family. So for the athlete to continue progressing and competing in the sport, especially as they move from local to regional, from regional to national, from national to international levels of competition, they need increasing levels of financial support to actually even stay in the game. And so the financial support can come from sponsors, from governing bodies, or prize money. And this support is what allows the athletes to focus on their training and competition rather than balancing a job with their sport. Right? If you remember from the first episode, like there's 4 things competing for the athlete's time. So you have the sport, like the training and the competition and stuff like that, then you have the job, like sustenance, however you make ends meet. This could be either a full-time job, or maybe it could be less than a full-time job working with a sponsor some of the time. Then you have your family and your loved ones, and then you have rest and recovery. And you really need to have all four covered to fulfill your potential. So the financial support from the sponsors, increasingly the sponsors and less so the governing bodies, this is how you balance this equation. And the financial support also is an sort of like a extrinsic reward, so external recognition and reward that again validates the intrinsic rewards furthermore. And I would say that in most sports, the financial support is mandatory for figuring out exactly how much potential you have in that sport. So it's crucial for answering the basic question of sport of who's the best. Okay, so next let's move on to the sport. And as I said, the sport is in my way of thinking, the sport is always represented by the governing body, and the governing body is the sports federation or association, or someone who manages the rules, who manages the connections to other sports bodies like Olympic committees and World Anti-Doping Agency and so on. Now, the sport governing bodies, basically, they have two functions in this reward scheme of things. So validation and financial distribution. The validation is their primary function. So the sports federation, let's take a national sports federation as an example. The National Sport Federation, if they are the authoritative body in their country in this sport, then they are the ones who can claim that this or that person is the national champion. So it's a critical role in answering the question of who's the best in this area, in this sport, and they provide that validation through formal recognition and rankings and titles and awards and maintaining record sheets and sometimes like sort of like other mechanisms for recognizing superior achievement. And the validation is crucial in legitimizing these achievements by the athlete and then establishing them within the sports hierarchy. And that's quite critical. Again, coming back to the question of who's the best. Also, we're going to the question of who's the all-time best, but that's an extended question, and we want to go deeper into that today. And I would say that in today's world, the sport organization has a very specific function, that they're the guardians of the data, the results, and this is sort of the mechanism of how they can how they can establish these official achievements within the sport. It's through data, which is a way to record the results of the sport, and this all adds up to the overall sports credibility and the athlete's reputation, or the legacy of the athletes. And this is an important thing, because that legacy is something which is non-tradable. So that's something that the athlete will carry for the rest of their lives. So if you're the national champion of the sport at some point in your life, you're always going to have that as part of your reputation. But the governing bodies also manage the distribution of financial resources within the sport. So these can be either money coming from license payments, from sponsorship agreements at the federation level, or public money, or grants, or something else. And the governing body is all they work with the sponsors directly to get money to the sport, and they redistribute it. And by redistribution, I mean that it's a separate mechanism from like reward money or prize money, for example, because like the prize money is about rewarding the talent of today, but then you typically also have a redistribution of those financial gains to also the next generation of athletic talent, or your youth champions and the next generation. So you're putting money into training funds and transferring them over to the next generation of athletes. So that's how you continuously build the legacy of that sport and ensure the success of tomorrow. Okay, so that's the role of the governing body or the sport in validation and financial distribution. And next we're going to move to the general public. And the general public really has two very, very important roles which play into different directions. So recognition and validation. So the general public, they are the ones who sort of recognize and get to celebrate the athletes. And this recognition is a virtual cycle. So once an athlete starts getting public recognition for their achievements, it increases their popularity, media coverage, fan support, and all of these. These lead to increased sponsorship agreements, increased financial support, increased ability to focus on developing themselves as an athlete within the sport and getting even more results in. So it's very, very important that to get to that point where you get that initial recognition and validation from the general public, typically to get the attention of the sponsors. And the validation part of this, the public validation, it comes through like in various forms, including like as direct fan engagement, like on your Instagram page or any social media, but also like attendance at events, tuning in when the sport happens to be in mass media and so on. But like this is more easier to understand in a more like the super popular sports where you have like live TV broadcasts of the major events. But even in niche sports, this can be like tuning into the like live YouTube broadcast of a championship event and so on. So these are like validation that yes, your sport is legit. We are interested. We're paying attention. Thus, we can recognize your champions. Okay, well then that leaves the sponsor. And the sponsor has also like they play along with on the axes of financial support, but also the need for recognition. So financial support is perhaps the easier one here to understand. So sponsors provide the critical financial backing that athletes and also sports need to thrive. And this can be either direct sponsorship deals or event sponsorships or partnerships with governing bodies. And in turn, sponsors expect visibility and brand alignment and positive association with the athlete or the sport. But it's super important to understand that the sponsors also give recognition. So, but it's a two-way street here. So the sponsors seek recognition from the public and validation that their investment in this sport or this athlete is yielding results in terms of brand awareness, for example, or direct sales even. But also they hand out recognition and validation of the athletic achievements to the sports and the athletes, more importantly, for their achievements, like the championships. And this plays like two ways, as I said. So it's on one hand, the brand is seeking for recognition from the general public, as is the athlete. So they have a joint interest in recognition, but they also give recognition, which is something that the general public is also paying attention to. So if we look at the interplay dynamics here, so between the athletes and the governing bodies, like the athletes rely on the governing bodies for validation through rankings and titles and official recognition. And in turn, the governing bodies depend on successful athletes to elevate the sports, to sort of borrow their persona for the sport. Because the sport in itself isn't interesting. It's only interesting as an expression of human potential. So you need that persona, you need that real person, that real champion to get that public interest and then get sponsorships. And the validation provided by these governing bodies, like these titles, also helps attract sponsors at the athlete level. Now, if we look at the interplay then between the athletes and the public, the athletes get intrinsic rewards from public recognition and validation. as I said, like I think that in terms of sports, intrinsic reward systems always have some external functionality there. You always need to be recognized for that intrinsic reward system to kick in, really. But in return, the athletes provide, sorry, in in the public's recognition, like the public recognition can enhance and increase and elevate the athlete's status and make them more attractive to sponsors. And in return, then the athletes provide like entertainment and inspiration to the public, which keeps them engaged in the sport. Now, between the athletes and the sponsors, well, there's the financial support from sponsors to athletes. That's pretty clear cut. But in return, the athletes provide those sponsors with visibility and positive brand association. So again, they're borrowing their persona for the benefit of the brand. And the more recognized and validated an athlete is by the public and the governing bodies, the more valuable they are to sponsors. But this is something that NextRide is taking to the next level, because like we believe that in emerging sports, this is more subjective than objective. We're not looking at total spectator amounts. We're looking at the delta, for example, the growth numbers. Because whereas in traditional sports sponsorship, it's all about attracting the absolutely biggest name you can find. But in emerging sports, the brands are actually looking for a growth story, an opportunity to tag along on this transformative journey. And especially when launching like new services or products, this can be spot on. But okay, there's one more interplay dynamic to look at, like that, and that's the governing bodies and sponsors, or between the governing bodies and sponsors. So again, the governing bodies, like they get also financial support from sponsors, and then they provide the official hierarchical support for the sport, the legit titles and champions and records and so on. And the sponsors, on the other hand, they expect the governing body to maintain the integrity of the sport. This is like things like disciplinary committees, anti-doping, and so on. But also increase the popularity and public interest over time. So keep working on those like digital media strategies and so on. And these are critical for ensuring the return on investment for the sponsor. Okay, so this has been our episode 3 of The Stride by Stride, a podcast focusing on sports sponsorship in emerging sports. So we've been looking at the interplays of intrinsic rewards and recognition, validation, and financial support, and how do athletes, the sport, the general public, and the sponsors, how do they all play together? And I'm laying this all out there sort of also as a future reference point, and also as a thinking mechanism for myself, because like explaining these things out loud makes it easier for me to also put my own thoughts together and also communicate them to you and to all the interested parties. So if you like this, please hit subscribe, give us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. Drop us comments if you have any questions. If you disagree, I really want to hear about it. Let's have a chat. And then also, if you're an athlete, especially in Europe, in emerging sports, in individual sports at the moment, please go to nextride.com and sign up. Also, if you're a sports organization in Europe and you're looking to ensure that you're doing the right things and you want to figure out what's the next best things that you could do to support and continue to validate your athletes, go to nextride.com. If you're a brand looking to sponsor emerging sports, look for a brand champion to personify your new product or service line, go to nextride.com. So yeah, and also, if you have an interesting story as an emerging athlete about sponsorship, or maybe you've been a sponsor and you have interesting anecdotes or experience to share, get in touch. Let's see if we can fit you in after the first 6 episodes when we go into the interviews of the stride. But that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening. You've been listening to the episode 3 of The Stride, and my name is JP. And at this moment, I take the opportunity to say thank you.